If you want a good panorama, everything needs to be consistent.
We could do a sky select automatic mask. Let's see if that works. It'll detect the sky, and there it did actually a pretty good job.
One of the things to look for when you're editing your shots like this, when you're doing the cuts, is you have to think,
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another weekly Coastal Drone Podcast episode. This week we're going to be editing some photos and video from a commercial shoot that we did several years ago, actually, but we talked about it a few weeks ago, and we're going to be going through how we did some panoramic photos and also a little bit of video editing in DaVinci Resolve. We're going to stitch together raw photos into panoramas, and then I'm going to do a quick run through on how to do some quick grading and some adjustments in DaVinci Resolve for video editing. So this is doing the after the shoot work of getting all your photos and videos ready for delivery for a commercial real estate shoot. So let's get right into it.
Yeah, so in the last video, we discussed how to set up a job like this, how to plan for an operation like this. Before we jump into the after shots, we're just going to take a look at how you would set up the drone to do a shot like this.
Okay, so we'll talk about the actual flying side of it. Because, the last episode we did a lot of pre-flight.
That's right.
And pre-job assessment. Go for it.
So how do we want to set up the drone? Well, we want manual exposure, manual shutter speed, and manual white balance. The key to a successful panorama is consistency. You want manual exposure for consistency. You want manual shutter speed. You want your shutter speed to be as long as you can get where the image still looks good. And you want manual white balance. Again, the key to this is consistency. When you are shooting a photo for a professional job, oftentimes the client will ask for photos in RAW. So Ian, what does RAW mean if someone is unfamiliar with the term RAW when it comes to photography?
Basically, with digital photos, there's two versions. There's JPEGs or HFs or whatever you want to call them. HEIFs now, I guess, the compressed images. And those are baked in and compressed. Or there's RAW, which is the data straight out of the sensor from the camera that you would then have to manually process yourself after the fact.
So the advantage of shooting in RAW is you have far more options with how you can edit this photo. You can still edit a JPEG. You can still change some of the aspects of the JPEG, but you get a lot more ability to edit when you're editing RAW. You can edit the light and the colors in much finer detail. But the disadvantage to this is you have to edit it, and it can take a little bit of time to edit a photo. Professional photographers could spend hours editing one photo. So if you need a tight turnaround, maybe RAW isn't always the best option, but a lot of the time it is best to shoot in RAW.
Yeah, so just to give a quick example, JPEGs can be processed really fast in the camera. As long as you have your settings correct, you shouldn't really need to do much in terms of adjusting your exposure or adjusting your color grade. Yes,
and if you're shooting on a phone with a JPEG, it's kind of a scenario if there will be people watching this of a certain vintage who remember the acronym WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. You line up the viewfinder on your iPhone and you set the exposure or whatever, and the photo is most likely just going to look like that.
Yeah.
So you can kind of figure out how to shoot the photo, and then as soon as that photo's done, you don't really need to touch it again.
Yeah, and just so you know, iPhone 13 and on, I believe you can shoot in RAW mode, so that you have the ability to edit it after the fact on your computer, just like we're going to be doing with the drone photos today.
I've got a Google Pixel, can also shoot RAW.
Perfect, yeah.
And then for this job, we set up the drone in spherical panorama mode. So it shoots a spherical panorama.
Yeah, so it's 24 photos that get shot in a sequence. So the drone will take off, and once it's in the air, you set the panoramic mode. It will then shoot in the direction it's starting, and then it'll rotate around in 360 degrees and also pan up and pan down at the same time. So you get 24 photos in total of 360 degrees at 3 different inclinations, so up and down on the camera.
Other factors, as I mentioned before, consistency is key. If you want a good panorama, everything needs to be consistent. Other factors for a job like this, so we, as part of the job, the customer asked for shots at at like I think it was like the 5th story, the 15th story, and the 20th story. You need to know how high roughly those stories are. Remember, this was before the building got built, so we're shooting on a vacant lot here, and you need to be able to climb up to where the 10th story is going to be, and then shoot the panorama.
Yeah, so it's 10, 50, 100, 150, 200. So every 50 feet up to 400 feet.
Yeah. For an operation like this, radio signal strength and interference. This was in kind of a downtown area, so lots of stray radio frequencies that could affect the flight. And then for this one, again, it's a downtown area, so bystanders. You have to be really conscious of bystanders because, so this was shot on a Mavic 3, which is good within 100 feet, but not within 16.4 feet or 5 meters. Which means that if someone were to wander into the operation while it's shooting the panorama, you'd have to cancel the panorama and start again. So watching out for bystanders is critical in an operation like this. And then also this was in close proximity to a heliport for a hospital in this downtown area.
Yeah, so you need to have an advanced pilot certificate in order to fly this job.
Yes, this was absolutely an advanced operation. And then how to fly. Manually fly to location, activate the spherical panorama mode, and you are able to shoot multiple panoramas on a single battery, and this is good because remember, consistency is key. If you're shooting them all in quick succession, it means that each panorama is going to be consistent across each altitude.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure all of this was shot on a single battery and I had lots to spare. Right, it's 40, give or take 40 minutes.
The operation is shot. We've got the photos in the camera. Sorry, we've got the photos in the computer. And Ian is going to show us how to stitch those all together.
All right. So we've got all the photos here, and I'm using Adobe Lightroom, which is the classic version. There's 2 different versions of Adobe. It is a subscription-based product. It's roughly $10 per month, but you get Adobe Lightroom as well as Adobe Photoshop and a little bit of cloud storage, I think, in that plan. But that's really all you need. If you're going to be doing photo editing, it's still one of the best options out there when it comes to photo editing. I know there's some free open source tools out there. There's lots of web-based editing tools. I've been using Adobe Lightroom since version 1.0, like way back in the dark ages. So it's what I know, it's what I love to use, and it's honestly one of the easiest for managing. So anyway, you'll see on here we've got the basic interface for Adobe Lightroom. Lightroom is a photo manager and raw processing engine. It's not a photo editor like Photoshop is, in the sense that you can do like a heavy retouching or coloring or creative work. That's where you would move over to Photoshop. Lightroom is meant first and foremost for organizing a massive storage library of photos, developing them like you would in the darkroom, and then preparing them for delivery to your customers. So you can do processing, developing, cropping, retouching, minor edits using the retouching tool, but it's not meant for crazy deep editing. So you can see on my left side here, I've got my source where my photos are, and I've got them organized by the height that they were shot. And so when I hover over the folders, you can see there's the built-in panoramas that were shot by the drone, and we're going to make one from scratch. So let's start with, we're going to use the 400-foot one since it's the highest elevation. It's going to give us the biggest shot anyway. And in that, I actually shot them twice. I shot them once with an ND or neutral density filter on, and once with the naked camera. And so you'll see there's 2 different versions, one slightly lower exposure than the other. I'm going to use the ND filter one because it has a little bit of polarization to it as well, which kind of cleans up contrast and improves the image a little bit. But
I was going to say, even just through the thumbnail, the contrast looks better on the ND filter.
Yeah, and they would have been a little bit darker exposure. Like, it was only an ND8, but the idea was just to like help lift the sky a little bit. So let's open that folder, and you'll see there's the 24 images plus the JPEG that was pre-made by the Panorama. So if I go into here, you'll see all these thumbnails. These are the individual shots that were done. And it doesn't look like the JPEG ended up in here. Is it this one? No. Anyway, so you can see when I pan over this that some of the, it's at 400 feet. That's why it's at the parent folder.
Oh, okay. Because the other thing I was going to say is the one with no ND filter has an extra photo in it.
Yeah, it should. because there should be one JPEG and 24 RAWs, right? That's usually the idea with the way that DJI process. Because even if you do raw processing mode, the drone is still going to process out a JPEG, so you have something ready to go right away. And the downside to that while you're flying the drone is you can't move the drone while it's processing the raw file, which is kind of weird because it's annoying, but it doesn't like it. If you try and move the drone after you finish processing the panorama, you have to wait about 30 to 45 seconds for it to process it and then move on to the next one.
Yeah, there's probably only so much horsepower in a Mavic.
And that's kind of one of the reasons to consider upgrading drones to like the 3S or the 4 or something else. It's not necessarily image quality, but maybe the onboard processor is faster and it's faster at doing panoramas. I haven't compared that, but it's something we should try if we can get our hands on one. Okay, so we've got all the images in here. I just want to make sure it's not showing the panorama.
This was an off-screen conversation, but Ian and I, before we were talking, and we determined that there is no problem that can't be solved with $15,000 worth of gear.
Yeah, of course.
Of course.
It's just like motorcycles. Okay, so maybe I misspoke. It's 25 photos, or maybe I took the first shot twice. But you can see here, so each one of these is the DNG file, so the digital negative or the raw file. So this is it's normally JPEGs are 8-bit color. These are 12 or 14 or 10-bit color. So there's more information available, and more importantly, there's more latitude available in the exposure. So an 8-bit color photo has 256 levels from 0 to 255 of information that can be up or down in the red, green, or blue space, right? So that's 2 to the power to the 8 to the power of 3 or something like that.
There's a lot of options.
65,000 colors or something like that. If it's more than that, it's millions of colors, and also it's there's exposure levels. So let's say it's 1,000 levels of exposure per RGB color.
And this is why raw files are bigger. Just they've got way more information. So you'll notice if you start shooting raw, like so, for example, on my camera I have a Nikon or a Nikon, depending on how you like to say it, and I can either shoot in JPEG or I can shoot in RAW. And when you select to shoot in RAW, it goes from like, oh, you can shoot 16,000 photos to you can shoot 400 on like a 64 gig card or something like that.
Yeah. So there's all 25. There's 2 ways I can do this. I could just send it. If I know the exposure is good, I can actually start photo merge process right now. Or if I feel that there's a major color correction that needs to be done at the per photo level, or if there was any kind of adjustments that needed to be done, say to the sky before I did it, I could then go into develop and commonize all my photos. So I could choose a reference photo to start with, like let's start with this one. And the reason is the sun is now on the left of the camera. You can see the shadow on the building here and over here, so that's it's pretty neutral. Maybe I want to pre-develop this and bring up the exposure a little bit. So we go into the develop view, and now I'm going to get rid of my toolbar here on the side, and let's get rid of the top bar so it's a little bit cleaner. And if I hit F, you can see it full screen and you can see the initial shot of it, right? So it's definitely high contrast. It's exposed for the sky, and the ground in the foreground is a little bit underexposed. So what I can do, oops, I'm just going to clean up my view again here. So you can look at the photo and you can see, yeah, it's a little underexposed. The other tool, we've talked about this in the past, and in our photo course, you look at the histogram and it's a little underexposed. The bulk of the pixels are down in the blacks and in the shadows. If I just hit auto, it's going to do a pretty good job of re-exposing the foreground and holding on to the background. And you look at how the histogram has changed. That's a little overexposed in my opinion now. It's a little high key and a little flat. So I'm going to undo that. And what I can do though is I can bring in the shadows and I can bring up the blacks, and you'll see the histogram move as well. And the shadow is a little too much. So I'm going to bring the exposure, which moves the entire slider up. And so I've added, let's say we're going to, just to do round numbers, we're going to have 1 stop of exposure, and I'm going to bring the highlights down a little bit.
And here's a tip for Lightroom. If you click on the number and drag the number, you can get a finer adjustment if you want to just do it
so you can
by
do the slider. I'm using my mouse on my touchpad here, so it's not super precise. But yeah, you can see how you can get
really fine if you do that.
Yeah.
We would recommend using an actual mouse to do this instead of just a touchpad.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've made this a little flatter, right? So it's not high, crazy key contrast. I've moved, And the other thing you can do is in the histogram, you can actually grab each section and move the section around. So if I want to just move the main exposure, I grab in the center of and you can see what that does. Great. Okay, that's nice and flat. It's not super contrasty. Remember, this is a spherical panorama that would be like, this is what your view looks like to the human eye, is the idea of these. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove any chromatic aberration. And so depending on the resolution of your image and the optical quality of the camera, you might get some CA and high contrast scenes. It's not really showing up here. And if I go option and zoom in, I think it is, I can go further. Yeah, so you really can't see it other than you see this purple fringing on the right side here. That's chromatic aberration. So that's just an optical quality issue. So if I go remove chromatic and enable optical, it's not really going to do much here. But if I go to manual, I can go defringe and just pull that purple saturation out a little bit. And it's a really minor thing, but the point is this is going to be a very, very large resolution image. And the point of this image was to be delivered at like mural size. So we're using every pixel that the camera can provide. So in that circumstance, you definitely want to make sure that you're not adding things like aberrations to the image. So we've done that. Now I need to harmonize all my other photos to the same exposure values, because all I've done here is added a bit of a recipe to the image. Right, so a little bit of color correction, a little bit of, I don't need to do any noise reduction or anything because it's a daytime exposure image. I can hit I and see that we shot this at 1/500th at f4 at 100 ISO. So it's a very low sensitivity, so there should be no noise at all in the image. Right, if there is any noise, it's just standard sensor noise, and I'm not going to, any noise correction is going to potentially change the image too much, which will be more obvious. So now I go back into the library, and you'll see that image has got a bunch of adjustments. You can see them down here, and there's two ways I can do this. So I'm going to right click on it, and I'm going to go to copy adjustments, which is under edit, develop settings, copy settings. I'm going to choose everything. I haven't done much. I've only done basic stuff. So I hit copy, and then I hit Command A to select everything else. And then I go to develop settings again, and I go paste settings. And you're going to see all the images, their previews are going to update. And then I can quickly look at them and be like, okay, yeah, they're all fine. The sky might be a little bit too strong, but I can always fix that after we've merged it, because let's get to the panorama side now. So now everything's set the way I want. I'm going to again select all. And this is where the power of Lightroom really kicks in. I'm going to right click on them, and I'm going to go to photo merge, and I'm going to go to panorama. And I'm going to let it default figure out on its own. It should be spherical, but we'll see if it stitches. There you go. So it's taken all the images in spherical projection, and it's created a very large panorama. And you can have it auto crop and auto settings and create a stack, or you can do some boundary warping. So if I want to adjust the way that the images, if I want to convert this to cylindrical, obviously it doesn't work because it was shot in spherical. So I'm going to hit merge. And now it's actually going to take the preview and all the pre-stitching, and it's looking for common things along the images. And it's going to render it in the background here, and you're going to see an image pop up in the library in a second of the actual panorama. So we're just basically waiting for the laptop to chew through this file. And what it's going to do is it's going to create a very large DNG file, digital negative file, that is very high resolution and still retains all the original color, detail, and depth. So you still have quite a bit of editability in the image. And of course, this part's going to be dependent on the speed of the hard drive you hooked up to, the speed of the chip. So it can take quite a while depending on how many megapixels your image is. There we go. It's showing up. There's the image, and it's still processing. Just going to wait for it to finish before we fully open it. There we go. It's done. So now we open it into the library. Without editing, you can see it's still a DNG file. And now we've got the full perspective in this single image. So if I wanted to render or put this into a VR or an augmented reality software, we now have it so it's a very, very large image. And of course, as it's loading right now, it's loading it into RAM, and my zoom level is set really high. How do I zoom out? Force zoom out.
I just got a question in the chat from Peter. He says, if you open the stitched JPEG in Google Photos or on an Android device, it is a spherical interactive image that you can pan and look around in.
Yeah, exactly. And it's the same with this. This would be, the only difference is we've skipped the step or the process of allowing DJI to render the photo, and we're doing it manually. And then we're coming up with the same result. We're just, instead of allowing the DJI algorithm to take care of all of it, we've got a bit more control. So now you can see this is the high resolution image. And again, it's still an interactive panorama. So if the customer just wanted this for their software, we'd be done, right? But now we could open this in Photoshop. We could do some correction. We could look for any stitching errors. It's all flattened. It's a single image at this point. If I look at the photo details, it's like, well, it's 25 times however many megapixels, 20 megapixels. So it's a lot of pixels. But you haven't lost any detail. Like if I zoom in further on that same building, you're going to see it's the same level of detail in the original image. It's just now a massive image. If I needed to develop it any further, if I wanted to do some adjustments on it, so we can go back to the zoom level here. Oops, there we go. Let's say I wanted to do some final adjustments on the color or on the exposure or anything else, right? Maybe it's still a little too contrasty, or maybe I want to fix the sky. Now I can actually do some adjustments here. So if I go into gradients, for example, we could do a sky select automatic mask. Let's see if that works. It'll detect the sky, and there it did actually a pretty good job. And so now I can say, let's bring the sky contrast down a little bit, but let's also bring the exposure down just a little so it's more of a richer tone. Just a minor adjustment, right? So it's a bit hyper real at this point, which is fine. And I'm going to bring the whites down a little bit too, because the sun is just a little overexposed. And maybe I'm going to actually warm it up a little. Let's just see. Nah, I don't like that. Let's just leave the color temperature the way it is. Maybe we can tint it a little bit. Yeah, a little tint seems to help. And this is, of course, to my eye. This is very subjective.
Yeah, like if you're editing in Lightroom and you make a change, or someone gives you a suggestion to do something and then you make that change and it looks like crap, go with your gut.
So, and then the other thing I want to do is I want to bring the foreground up, because there's a big shadow here, and that's just the way the exposure is. But what I'm going to do, so I'm going to go back into masking and create another mask, and I'm just going to do a gradient mask, and I'm going to drag it up from the bottom. And so the red area is the area that's going to be of influence. So I'm just going to move that boundary line to the horizon. And by making the gradient sharper or shorter, it's going to make that line more obvious. All right, so now I have a more defined transition line, and it'll stay red so that you know that's what you're working on. If I click away, I could actually hide the mask line by just doing here, this little checkbox should, yeah. So that's just showing you the effect of it. Now I can adjust the exposure. So let's warm up the ground a little bit, and let's bring the exposure up just a little bit more. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually bump the shadows a little bit more. So we're not necessarily bringing up everything, and we can crush the highlights just a little bit. And let's bring the whites. And remember, whites are the far extreme, right? Then you've got highlights, then you've got exposure. So if I want to bring the exposure up, because I don't want it to look overexposed, but I also don't want it to be too strong, because you remember that the sky is very dark and very rich as well. So that's looking pretty good. And then now I can adjust that if I want more of, like, if I want to make sure the transition's more, like I'm not accidentally crushing the distant and it's not like it's a bright foreground and a dark subject. I'm okay with the building being, but you got to remember, and you can also do a plus here, and you can add, oops, that's not what I wanted. How do I remove that? Yeah, so I've got that one. No, I don't want that. So I want to remove that. There we go. So this is this set of adjustments, and this is this set of adjustments. And you can have multiple masks inside it. So I've got the foreground, but let's say I want to add a brush to it. So I'm just going to go a brush, and I'm going to make my brush really small so that I capture just these buildings. That way they're not fully past the line. And so what that does is it just adds, it's an additive to the gradient. Okay, I'm happy with that. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel here. So this is good. I'm happy with the way everything looks. Now I need to send it to the client, right? So you don't want to send them a 800 megapixel JPEG or a DNG file. I want to send them a full-size JPEG. So in Lightroom, once you're done everything and you're happy with it, you have to export it. So then I'm going to go to export, and I'm going to put it onto the same external hard drive. Well, we'll just throw it on the desktop. That's fine. And we're going to call it file name. And you can actually add or remove tags from it. So you can have the original, or I can just go fully custom. And we're going to say this is Surrey Pano 400 feet .jpg. And hit. I'm going to go down to file settings and make sure I'm sending this for print. So I want it to be full quality, and the color space is going to be important. So in this case, it's sRGB, which is fine. It is going to render it out as an 8-bit JPEG.
Is there a way here to edit the metadata so no one steals your photo?
You can, yeah. So you can actually do embed copyright information and everything else into it, and then you can also size it. So we're going to do 100% JPEG. It's the most compatible. It's a standard. Like there's now HDR stuff. There's HEIF, AVIF. Like there's different formats that you can do, but that gets messy, right?
For something like this, a JPEG is perfectly.
Yeah. And then I'm not going to resize it, because what I could do is I could resize it down to 2048 pixels, which would mean that the entire panorama is only 2000 pixels wide, which is great for the web. They might want copies that are all that, but the reality is we're not going to resize this. It's going to be the original. And then the other option you always have is sharpening, which is an artificial thing, but we're not resizing. We're not improving at anything. There's already some sharpening applied in the raw processing. If you found that wasn't enough, you'd be better to do it in the actual image in this state. And then you're talking about metadata. You can pull all the metadata off, and you can have only copyright. And then you could watermark it if you want, but watermarks are nothing these days. It's just a marketing tool. It's not going to protect your image. There's so many AI watermark removal tools. I've seen on a few drone groups where people are watermarking it like a full grid, like it looks like a Louis Vuitton pattern on it, but it's like that doesn't do anything other than ruin your image at this point. So don't do it. There's no point. Hit export. Now it's going to start converting this DNG file into JPEG. Again, it's really big, so it's going to take more than a few seconds to do this. So we'll let it grind on that for a minute here. And that's pretty much it. So if I go to the Finder and I go to my desktop, there it is. There's the original file. I'm just in preview mode. If I go to open with preview, this file is the original file. You can find out where I park my car. Probably not. That's the wrong. Yeah, it's going to be somewhere down here.
You parked your car in the shot. Oh,
There it is.
There you are.
There it is. There's Waldo. Yeah. Also, try and hide yourself well when you're taking shots like this.
So don't wear a high vis.
Yeah. So, but that was where we took the shot from, and then we just centered it over the property itself. So you've got the full shot there. Okay. So we talked about panoramas.
This is really cool how it just did it.
Yeah. And it's easy, right? So we've done that. So we're gonna shift gears now to DaVinci Resolve. So I promised we would do a little bit of video stuff, because I also had to go back and they wanted video as well as still panoramas for the shot. And the idea was that they were going to visualize the 3D render of the building and superimpose it into the footage. So I had to go at sunrise, noon, and sunset, and the panoramas were done at noon because that'd be a neutral day that you could fake it. You could add color grading or replace the sky for the stills.
It's much easier to make a sunset from a neutral sky than it is to turn a sunset into like
Daylight.
a daytime.
Yeah, exactly. It's like day for night shots on TV shows like the X-Files.
I never saw it.
Oh, anyway, so because sunset always looks the best on camera, here's my sunset stuff. So these are all the MP4 files that I shot from that shoot. And I'm going to quickly go through my process by which I cull or eliminate shots and clean them up. I've already done this a little bit, but first thing I want to talk about is really quick. We just talked about raw photos. Really quick, want to talk about log video. We talk a lot about this in our course and in general in other episodes, but log video is the same idea as raw. It's not raw video. Log is a compressed exposure curve that allows for more information at the edges of the curve. So you get more information recoverable in shadow and more information recoverable in the highlights because it's taken the exposure and taken that contrast and crushed it into an S or a log curve. That is a terrible technical explanation and it's very wrong, but that's what you're getting right now because we're doing this really quick.
It's better than any explanation I could give.
Yeah. So it's just the image is going to look flat and desaturated and crushed because it's cramming more information into it than 8-bit video can expose, right? So there's math that takes the footage and then you use math to push it back out. So the footage out of the box looks like this. It's kind of flat, kind of just, right, a little bit rough and a little bit raw. So this footage is captured in a higher color bit space than standard YouTube video or standard definition video is. In DaVinci Resolve, which is available free as well as the paid subscription, you have the ability to manage the color and input the color in certain spaces. So right now, this copy is the unedited, original, straight out of the camera, 10-bit footage. Right? You can see on the right side here, it says H.265 main 10 level 6. Right? So it's 10-bit footage in H.265. On certain versions of DaVinci Resolve, you have to pay in order to be able to open 10-bit footage, just to be clear here. But let's look at the 374 file with color management enabled. Right? So what this does is then it says, okay, this is 10-bit log footage, but display it as if it were 8-bit. So it gives you it's kind of a quick inline conversion. The other footage, so we'll look at 371 here. This is the same unedited log footage coming out of the drone. If I go to the 371, this is with a DJI lookup table applied to it. So it's still treating it like the original footage, but now it's saying red for red, green for green, blue for blue. It's applying some math, looking at a 3D lookup table, or a LUT is being applied. So when you right-click on the footage and I go to LUT, you can see I'm using the DJI Mavic 3 D-Log to Rec 79 version 1. It's an old LUT, but it still checks out.
And you could potentially put a different filter on it, or not filter, but a different algorithm on it, or
yeah. So it's basically
invert color.
Yeah, there are stylistic LUTs which change the way things look, or there's technical LUTs which change.
Please click on invert color.
Where's invert? Oh, right there.
Awesome.
There you go. So now it looks like it's infrared or negative film.
Yeah, now it looks very spooky.
Right? So it's just taking it and inverting the color. And this is at the input level. So I'm in the media manager. I'm just managing raw footage. And by raw, I mean unedited.
Yes, and this is a lossless process. So
yeah, I'm not destroying the footage.
The footage is not inverted forever. I just wanted to see that.
Yeah, so let's go back and just put that one back into DJI's LUT. And you can download new LUTs. There's tons of LUTs out there. Anyway, I'm going to go into the editor and I'm going to talk really quick about how I kind of cull footage. So I've already taken all the shots and dumped them onto a timeline. That's the first thing you want to do when you're editing this stuff, especially if you're just delivering raw footage to the client. You don't want to deliver from the second you hit record to the second you stop record, because the reality is you're going to have shots that you're going to be resetting the camera, moving the camera, or you might wiggle your fingers inadvertently and you're not going to get a perfect shot out of it. So let's hide the inspector. Let's hide the media pool here because I've already got the footage on the timeline here. And basically all this footage down here, I've already gone through and I've trimmed the footage to the take, right? So the idea is let's look at something here real quick. Let's see if I can make this not take up a ton of the space. So if I hit the space bar, you'll see it starts with the camera already moving. This isn't going to be the whole shot that I'm going to use. I might use only a couple seconds of this sequence. But what I've done, and I'll just zoom right to the entire timeline, is as I scrub through, you'll see it's a consistent shot, right? There's no dramatic change in the way that the camera moves. This is an elevator shot, so it just goes straight up and that's it. Next shot. It's an elevator shot with a pan down. Next shot. It's a really jittery, it's trying to pull the raw footage here. It's not using proxies. Let me just force this thing into proxy mode and see if that'll smooth things up a little bit, because it probably did render proxies. Yeah, so it's a little smoother now. This is all 5K footage, by the way, out of the Mavic 3. So it's not small. When I pan around, this is a pan shot, which I personally hate. I don't like doing pan shots, but I have an unbroken pan. So it's all of these shots are going to be one move per shot, right? So if I pan it, and you'll see it's going to just keep going, and it's a slow pan. When you do pans like this, you really want to make sure you don't incorporate. And you saw how actually there was a little bit of a frame jitter at the end there. So I go through it. Oh, I stopped the move. So I need to trim that just a little bit more. And on DaVinci, I've got it set to trim to the playhead. So if I hit the W key in my shortcuts that I've set up, it's going to trim that out so that it disappears.
And is that also lossless? Like, could you get that those frames back?
Yeah, all I'm doing right now is working on the timeline, which is it references the original file and says at this point in this file, right? So if I double click on 366 and I go into my, you can see this is the original video, and this is how much I've kept of that original video down here on this far right side.
Yeah, so if you accidentally trim too much, you could put it back.
Yeah, you could adjust the ins and outs. It's non-destructive. So those are all the shots, right? And you've got some sliding shots, you've got an elevator shot, I've got another pan shot, different exposures, and as the scene started to change, but it's fairly consistent in that. Now, this is that one shot that we applied the LUT to, which is why it's pink and more magenta, but the same shot here is without it, right? So at the source level, I've said this is not. Now, I've highlighted some footage in green here. This shot is color managed, but it's also log footage. This is also log footage. And this is log footage, but I've used the color management. So out of the box, you can see it's dramatically different. But same thing, I've got some adjustment to do there as well. But I wanted to switch to, so the Mavic 3, the original Mavic 3 has two lenses, right? It has a wide angle and has a telephoto lens. And I wanted to get some telephoto shots. But in 2022, when this was shot, and I think still to this day, you can't shoot log color profile on the telephoto lens, which means you have to force it back into default color, which means I lose that flexibility. So just to remind you, this is what the log shot looks like on the wide, but the exact same shot, this is the exact same time. I literally changed the lens and went to telephoto to get this shot. That's how rich the color was, and the contrast was quite crushed coming out of the 7X in default color. And so this was almost the same location the drone was, but using the 7X lens and just doing a long pan. The other thing is, I think the frame rate changed back, or actually this was just after they updated the firmware, so you could still do 24 frames a second.
Yeah, so you saw like with the other ones, it doesn't really look like anything, and then this is a Blade Runner.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's the difference in color grade and sensors. So like I could grade this to look the same as this. I can't grade this to look like this, right? I can't go back from bright, super oversaturated color into flat log. You can't undo it. Like it would just look terrible. So I left two shots here that were untrimmed, so you can see the culling process a little bit more. So we've got, this is the original shot, and well, almost the original shot. I've already pre-trimmed it a little bit. I'm like, all right, let's do this quick here. So you can see there's an orbiting shot, and you can see the little bit of wiggle at the beginning that I didn't like, and then it orbited here, but I'd already pre-done a little bit on another shot, so I'm like, wow, this is kind of the same shot over and again. So what I'm doing is I'm starting on the motion, and I'm going to continue the orbit. And you can see how it starts to pull away a bit more of a pirouette and reveal at the end here. And I get to that point, it's like, oh, no, I'm readjusting and I'm panning. So there's a shot here where it breaks apart and it breaks the illusion of being a flying camera. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to here and I'm looking for when the movement stops. So right around there. And I'm going to hit R and I'm going to trim that. So now you can see the whole shot's there. Oh, that didn't trim at the same time. So I'm going to do it on the timeline because it looks like the frame rate might have been different. This might have been a high frame rate shot. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to come to here and I'm going to go to right about there. And I'm just scrubbing through. You can see how the drone goes all wonky. So I go like that and I hit R to trim it. So now I've got that R is to razor cut that footage. And now I'm looking to see, is this shot worth keeping? What kind of shot is it? Right, it looks like I'm doing a bit of adjusting here, just kind of experimenting with it. There's not really anything that's compelling to me. Like maybe this is a pull in, there's a reverse reveal, but it's not, you know what? Like it's not worth keeping to me at this point. Yeah, so toss. Right?
Yeah, and like if you're doing multiple shots, you probably have a better reverse reveal than that.
Yeah, you got to be critical. So I just got rid of it. It's fine. I'll move that one down into the delivery timeline.
So when you're doing these, like, one of the things to look for when you're editing your shots like this, when you're doing the cuts, is you have to think, Ian mentioned the drone as a flying camera, and you can just think about what platform we would have used before this to get similar shots. Well, that's airplanes and helicopters. Airplanes and helicopters can't stop or turn abruptly. They can only do it with smooth movements, just because that's how they work. So if you're noticing your shot is looking weird, think about it as like, could someone in a helicopter fly this shot? Could someone in an airplane fly this shot? And if you think that it's too jittery or too back and forth, then it's probably something that they wouldn't be able to do.
Yeah. So like here, I got ADD and I'm like, oh, I want the sunset on the skyline, but I also wanted this reveal here. So I'm going to pull this. It's going to be really abrupt. So I'm going to trim it to here. And I'm going to go up the elevator. And you see where it starts to blur there? I need to crop it right there. So I'm going to hit R. And then I'm going to go to this shot. And I'm going to trim that so that it gets rid of that transition. But I'm also going to trim it a bit more because now the camera starts moving. Because you want to cut on the movement. And that one's pretty solid, so it stops right around there. Same thing, so I'm going to hit razor to trim that. And there's another reveal here. And this is just initial culling, right? This isn't editing. This is just trimming the fat from footage so that I know I've got usable shots to then start assembling into a sequence after the fact. You see how I've got a bit of a yaw there? So as I was climbing up, I got, again, a little bit ADD. And I got to decide, is that intentional? Or is that not worth it? Because the other thing is like the horizon is dead center on the shot. So I'd probably crop this a little bit one way or the other to get the horizon out. Like here it's layered. There's an interesting thing going on here. So I might, and if I can't figure out this shot, I might just move on and keep going until I find something that makes sense to me. Because like that's kind of cool because you've got like, it's just, but the gimbal was a little twisted there too, eh? So... is that savable? That's savable. This one's a little bit jittery, so we're not going to use that. So we're just going to trim it so I stop looking at it. And that one. So there's that. And again, like we're not going to use these shots necessarily. I'm trying to find if there's anything else worth keeping. This is an awkward move. So I might use that, but I don't know what I would use it for, right? So...
yeah, you might have a perfect shot that doesn't really fit in an edit.
yeah, and don't force yourself to use it.
No.
Right? There. So these are, like if I play this sequence now, it's a little slow. I wonder, was this? Yeah, it's okay. So remember I was talking about the frame rate. So this was shot at 30. Even though the timeline is 24, so that's why it's feeling a little slow. The frame rate's a little high. So I'd have to go in and adjust it.
Actually, Ian, it was shot at 29.97.
Yeah. So NTSC drop frame code.
Yes.
Or, yeah, drop time code. Anyway, that's why it looks a little bit slow. So I'd have to actually speed it up 1.3% or whatever it is, the difference between 24 and 30.
And then you put some vaporwave in the background, and this would be awesome.
Synthwave. And it's a Michael Mann film. But
I don't know who that is.
Come on. Miami Vice, Heat.
Like the basketball team?
No.
Miami Heat?
No. The movie.
I've never seen
With
that.
Val Kilmer.
Who? Oh, I know who that is.
Anyway.
If you don't see me ever again after this podcast, you'll know why.
Yeah. So that's culling. That's really what I wanted to talk about. And we talked really quick about color space management. So like why it's worth shooting in log, because you get this capability. Real quick, let's go into color space. The other way you can do it. So you can do it before where you can just apply, or you can go into color and you can take this footage and I can force it with a LUT and do the same thing. Like I can do the DJI Mavic 3 LUT and you'll see how it changes the color. And maybe that's too much, right? Maybe that's not what I want to do. So I could get rid of the LUT and I could just do it manually and I could color grade it. So I'd probably want to do like additional nodes, but just because I'm forcing it through here, I'm going to get rid of the effects. And there's two ways you can do this. You can push it into a color space transform first. So I go into effects and I go into color space and I drag that one here, and I can actually just do this and this. And so then I've got a single effect as another node. And what the idea with this is I can say, okay, I can define what the footage was. And in this case, it's DJI log footage. Let's see if dgamut does it. And we're going to say that this was DJI log, dlog. And what I want to do is I'm also going to do another CST, color space transform. And I'm going to put it here. And if I hit Alt, I think I can just drop it right on. Yeah. So what that does is now I want to say, I want to convert this back out to Rec 709. And I'm going to do standard sRGB LUT or color space. And so what happens now is I take the original footage and in this space here, I can apply in between them any kind of color adjustments in the DaVinci managed color space. So it gives me a little more flexibility. I don't necessarily have to like make a permanent change. And so I can turn this one off and just stay inside this in log. And I can say I want to go to color, DaVinci wide gamut color. And I can say, okay, well, we're going to actually work in HDR inside this as well while I'm working. But I'd have to set up my color space and everything else to do that. So it gets a little more complicated.
We could do like 10 episodes on how to do this.
And I still have no idea what I'm doing.
We could do 100 episodes on this.
But down here on the bottom left, you've got color management, you've got camera raw. This isn't raw footage, so you don't have that. But you have the primary color wheels, so these are the basic ideas. So lift, gamma, gain, right? So gamma is your main, lift is bringing your shadows up, and gain is managing your highlights. So if I wanted to bring up my main exposure, and on the right side I've got a scope, and it's from 0 to 1,000. And so that's kind of like a real-time histogram of the shot. Maybe I want to darken the shadows, so I'd pull the lift down, I'd bring the gamma up, and all I'm doing is adding contrast, and maybe I want to crush the exposure, right? And then the offset is just everything up or everything down, right? So it's kind of like a coarse exposure. So what I'm doing is I'm just grading it. I'm doing what the LUT already does, but I'm controlling it a little bit more. So the exposure tools, everything are in here. We're not going to get any deeper than that today, but that's where you would have the ability to modify it. So that's quick and dirty video and editing panoramas and building out a panorama from raw footage.
Mm-hmm.
So same with this. All of this is non-destructive. If I need to export it, I'll just go back to the timeline real quick so you can see if I wanted to export something, you've got the quick export, which I can then quickly deliver something in whatever resolution I wanted to. Or there's the rocket ship panel, which is the full export, which you could go in here and go to, for example, if they're going to YouTube, just choose YouTube 4K. It's going to convert the color space to whatever is appropriate. You can set the color, the audio.
Yeah, and if it's destined for a social media, it's good to use their preset because like YouTube will crush it when you upload it. So
It's better to have it set to their best practices. So
Exactly.
it's not reprocessing it every time.
exactly, the more processing, the worse it's going to look.
Yeah, we have a more video specific episodes in the past here. And of course, we've got more content in our video, pro photo and video course to go through that as well. So we get into deeper detail on this, and we've got a few more episodes to record to put into that course. So check that out.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, thanks a lot for watching this week and for going through panoramas and a quick kind of shallow dive into video editing or just initial culling with DaVinci Resolve as well. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Have a good one.